No one at the hotel could understand the alien visitor, only the young human. The atmosphere in the grand atrium of the Stellaris Hotel felt like a coiled spring, tension radiating from the shimmering, iridescent form of the dignitary standing at the center of the lobby. Liara moved with a heavy, deliberate grace that spoke of a homeworld where gravity demanded every muscle be carved from iron and fluid grace. She looked like a sculpture of violet marble, her skin glowing with a faint, bioluminescent pulse that quickened whenever the hotel's staff approached her. The diplomatic translators hummed and sputtered, outputting nothing but static and fragmented vowel sounds that made no sense to the gathered crowd. She was speaking, her throat vibrating with a resonant hum that felt like a physical weight in the air, but the machine intelligence of the station couldn't find a pattern. The various alien species backed away, unnerved by the sheer physical presence of a woman whose very voice seemed to rattle the floorboards. Asher watched from the maintenance gantry, his hands greasy from recalibrating the life support vents, his eyes fixed on the way her shoulders stayed rigid under the weight of her ceremonial robes. He saw the way her fingers, long and tipped with blunt, darkened nails, dug into the palms of her hands until the violet skin turned pale. He didn't see a terrifying alien enigma. He saw someone having a panic attack in a room full of people who were treating her like a broken computer. He climbed down the ladder, his boots hitting the polished floor with a dull thud that drew the attention of the security droids. He ignored them, walking straight toward the center of the diplomatic circle with a calm, steady gait that was uniquely human in its lack of subservience to the high-gravity presence. "You're hurting her," Asher said, his voice cutting through the electronic whine of the failing translators. The lead concierge, a spindly creature with 4 eyes, waved him away. "This is a matter for the High Council. Technician, return to your station before your contract is terminated." Asher didn't stop, closing the distance until he was within arm's reach of Liara. The air around her was hot, smelling of exotic resins and something sharp, like salt and scorched earth. He didn't speak to the staff again, instead turning his focus entirely to the woman who towered a full head above him. He reached out, not to grab her, but to offer his hand, palm up, in the universal human gesture of peace. Liara froze, her hum dropping to a low, mournful thrum that vibrated in Asher's chest. She looked down at the human, her eyes wide and swirling with colors that reminded him of a nebula in deep space. She saw a creature of soft skin and exposed pulse points, a being that should have been crushed by the psychic and physical pressure she was inadvertently emitting. Yet he stood there, his heart beating a steady, rhythmic cadence that she could feel through the very air. "It's too loud for you, isn't it?" Asher whispered, his eyes locked on hers. He stepped closer, braving the intense heat of her skin, and gently placed his hand over her thrumming throat. The contact was like an electric shock that traveled up his arm, a surge of raw, unfiltered emotion and sensory data that nearly buckled his knees. He didn't pull away, but instead used his other hand to guide her toward the service elevator, shielding her with his body from the gawking crowds. Inside the small metal box of the elevator, the silence was immediate and thick. Liara slumped against the wall, her massive frame causing the lift to groan as she slid down to the floor. Asher knelt beside her, his smaller, warmer hands finding hers and interlacing their fingers. "The station's frequency is tuned for low-mass species, and it's hitting your nervous system like a hammer," Asher explained, though he knew the words weren't being translated. He pulled a small, handheld sonic dampener from his belt, a tool meant for silencing noisy pipes, and began to tune it to the specific vibration of her biosignature. As the device emitted a soft, counter-rhythm, Liara's breathing finally slowed, the violet glow of her skin softening into a warm, inviting lavender. She leaned her head back against the cold metal, her eyes closing as she let out a long, shuddering breath. "Human," she murmured, the word vibrating through her skin into his palms, perfectly clear without a machine. She didn't need a translator because her body was learning the frequency of his voice, the steady, grounded pitch of a species that lived in the messy middle of the galactic spectrum. They reached the penthouse suite, a space designed for luxury that she had found to be a gilded cage of sensory torture. Asher led her inside, the doors sliding shut to seal them in a world of muted lights and plush fabrics. Liara turned to him, her movements no longer stiff but predatory in their grace, her height now a point of dominance as she stepped into his personal space. She reached out, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, her touch surprisingly soft for someone with such immense physical power. "You are the only one who hears the song," she said, her voice a melodic rasp that made the hair on Asher's arms stand up. He felt the heat of her body radiating through his work jumpsuit, a feverish warmth that promised something far more intense than mere conversation. Asher didn't back down, his human stubbornness and burgeoning desire keeping him rooted to the spot. He reached up, unzipping the top of his jumpsuit to vent the heat, his skin glistening with a light sheen of sweat in the humid air she required. "We're good at listening to things that don't want to be heard," Asher replied, his voice dropping to a low growl. Liara's eyes darkened, the swirling colors settling into a deep, stormy blue as she watched the pulse jumping in his neck. She leaned down, her lips brushing against his ear, her breath smelling of sweet spice. "Show me how a creature of such fragile bones can endure me," she challenged, her hand sliding down to his chest, feeling the frantic but strong rhythm of his heart. The kiss was an explosion of sensory input, Liara's mouth tasting of things Asher couldn't name, a mixture of ozone and honey that filled his senses. She tasted him with a hunger that was ancient, her tongue flickering against his in a dance that was as much a biological exchange as it was a romantic gesture. Asher groaned, his hands finding the heavy silk of her robes and pulling her closer, his fingers searching for the skin beneath the finery. He found it at the small of her back, the texture like polished silk over granite, and he marveled at the sheer density of her. She lifted him effortlessly, his feet leaving the floor as she carried him toward the wide, oversized bed that dominated the room. She laid him back against the pillows, her weight descending upon him like a warm, heavy blanket that threatened to pin him into the mattress. Asher didn't feel trapped. He felt anchored, the physical pressure of her body grounding the electric hum of the station that had been bothering them both. He moved beneath her, his hands mapping the ridges of her ribs and the powerful curve of her hips, his touch causing her to arch her back and let out a sound that was half purr, half shout. "Is this too much?" Liara whispered, her hair falling around them like a curtain of dark light. Asher shook his head, his hands moving to the fastenings of her robe. "It's exactly enough," he said, his voice thick with a need that transcended species or language. As the robes fell away, revealing the intricate, glowing patterns that ran down her limbs, Asher felt a sense of awe. She was a map of a different star system, a living testament to an evolution that had perfected the female form for a world of high stakes and higher pressure. He touched one of the glowing lines on her thigh, and she gasped, her entire body shuddering as the light flared bright white. "We are connected by the nerves," she explained, her voice trembling. "My people feel everything through the light." Asher smiled, a slow, confident expression that spoke of humanity's innate ability to find the pleasure points in any system. "Then let's see how bright we can make you glow," he said, his mouth following the path his fingers had taken. The hours that followed were a blur of violet light and human heat, a symphony of physical discovery that left them both exhausted and exhilarated. Asher pushed his body to the limit, his human stamina proving to be the perfect counterpoint to her intense, high-gravity bursts of energy. He learned the exact pressure she needed, the way his teeth against her shoulder would send ripples of light cascading down her back, and how the salt of his skin seemed to act as a stimulant for her. Liara, in turn, found a fascination in his vulnerability, the way his skin would bruise under her touch if she wasn't careful, and the way his breath would hitch in a specific, musical way when she moved against him. They were a collision of two different worlds, finding a middle ground in the friction of their bodies. Later, as they lay entangled in the damp sheets, the room quiet save for the soft hum of the sonic dampener, the reality of the summit returned. "They will expect me to sign the treaty tomorrow," Liara said, her head resting on Asher's chest, her ear pressed to his heartbeat. "The trade routes through the inner rim depend on my word." Asher stroked her hair, his mind already working through the technical hurdles. "The treaty is fine, it's the environment that's the problem," he noted. The translators weren't failing because they couldn't understand you. They were failing because they were trying to filter out the very frequencies you use to communicate intent. He sat up, pulling his datapad toward him, his fingers flying across the screen as he began to draft a new protocol. "I can rewrite the interface," Asher explained, showing her the lines of code. "Instead of trying to turn your speech into their words, I'm going to make the station's atmospheric sensors translate your biovibrations into a visual and tactile language." Liara watched him, her eyes filled with a new kind of wonder. "You would change the station for me." Asher looked at her, his expression serious. "I'd change the whole galaxy if it meant I could hear you clearly," he said, and for the first time, the sentiment was backed by the technical skill to make it happen. The next morning, the diplomatic chamber was packed with representatives from a dozen systems, all of them whispering about the human incident from the day before. When Liara entered, she wasn't alone. Asher walked a step behind her, carrying a modified broadcast unit that hummed with a low, soothing frequency. As she took her place at the podium, the lights in the room began to shift, responding to the subtle changes in her mood and the resonance of her voice. When she spoke, the air didn't rattle with static. It shimmered with colors that everyone in the room could feel in their bones. The ambassadors stood in stunned silence as the alien language became a universal experience of emotion and logic, perfectly translated by a human who had simply decided to listen. Liara's speech was a masterpiece of diplomatic nuance, her points landing with the weight of her homeworld's gravity but the clarity of a mountain spring. She spoke of cooperation not as a series of trade laws, but as a harmonization of different biological rhythms. The High Council, usually a group of bickering bureaucrats, found themselves nodding in unison, moved by the sheer honesty of the presentation. Beside the podium, Asher kept his eyes on his monitors, but his heart was with the woman who was currently commanding the room. He saw the way she glanced back at him during a pause, her eyes momentarily flashing that deep, intimate violet that only he knew the meaning of. When the treaty was signed, the room erupted in a sound that was finally, for once, not translated through a machine, but felt through genuine applause. Liara stepped down from the dais, ignoring the outstretched hands of the dignitaries to go straight to Asher. She took his hand in front of the entire galaxy, her bioluminescence flaring in a display of public affection that was unheard of for her species. "The human has redefined our understanding of communication," the High Arbiter announced, his voice filled with a rare note of genuine respect. But Liara wasn't listening to the Arbiter. She was leaning in toward Asher, her lips close to his ear. "The meeting is over," she whispered, the vibration of her voice sending a familiar shiver down his spine. They retreated back to the privacy of the suite, but the dynamic had shifted. They were no longer strangers seeking comfort, but partners who had changed the course of history. Asher felt a surge of pride, not just for his technical success, but for the woman who had trusted him to be her voice. He turned to her as the door closed, but he didn't have time to speak before she was on him, her passion fueled by the victory they had shared. She pressed him against the door, her hands roaming his body with a desperate intensity. "I thought I would be alone in this part of the stars," she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. "I thought your species was too soft to survive the truth of mine." Asher laughed, a low, confident sound as he wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him. "We're a lot tougher than we look, Liara," he said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that matched her own. "We've spent our whole history adapting to things that should have killed us. A little extra gravity and some high-frequency light, that's just a Tuesday for us." She smiled, her teeth white against her violet lips, and then she was kissing him again, a deep, soul-searing contact that made the previous night feel like a mere rehearsal. He felt the raw power in her muscles, the way she could have crushed him if she chose, but instead, she was choosing to be soft for him. They moved to the balcony, looking out over the swirling clouds of the gas giant the station orbited. The rings of the planet shimmered in the distance, a billion fragments of ice reflecting the light of the local star. Liara leaned against the railing, her body glowing softly in the twilight of the station's artificial day. "My people want to name a star after you," she said, turning to look at him. Asher joined her, leaning his hip against the rail, looking out at the vastness of space. "I'd rather they just keep the trade lanes open," he joked, though his hand found hers and squeezed. "And maybe send a few more engineers my way so I'm not the only one doing the heavy lifting." Liara's expression became serious, her swirling eyes searching his face. "They want me to stay as the permanent envoy," she revealed. They say the bridge we built is too important to leave to machines. Asher felt a pang of hope, a sudden, sharp desire to see where this path led. And what do you want? He asked, his voice quiet. Liara stepped closer, her body blocking out the light of the stars, her presence filling his entire world. I want the human who hears my song to be the one who teaches me how to live among the stars, she said, her hand coming up to rest over his heart. Asher didn't hesitate. He leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers. I think I can manage that, he said. The future was a vast, open expanse, filled with political landmines and technical challenges that would require every bit of human ingenuity he possessed. But as he felt the steady, powerful thrum of Liara's life force against his own, he knew that there was no challenge they couldn't overcome together. They were a new frequency in the galaxy, a harmony that had never been heard before, and they were just getting started. The hotel was quiet now, the visitors sleeping, but in the penthouse, the light was just beginning to flare. As the weeks turned into months, the Asher-Liara protocol became the gold standard for all high-risk diplomatic encounters. Human technicians were suddenly the most sought-after experts in the quadrant, their natural empathy and technical flexibility proving to be the ultimate diplomatic tool. But for Asher and Liara, the galaxy's acclaim was secondary to the quiet moments they shared in the heart of the station. They spent their evenings exploring the limits of their connection, finding new ways to bridge the gap between their biologies. Asher built her a specialized gravity chamber within his quarters, a place where she could finally feel the full weight of her heritage, while he wore a reinforced exosuit to stay by her side. Inside the chamber, under the crushing force of 3 gravities, their romance took on a new, even more intense dimension. Asher felt the strain on his bones, but the sight of Liara moving with total, uninhibited freedom made every bit of discomfort worth it. She was a goddess of iron and light in this environment, her movements so fast and powerful they were almost a blur. She would catch him, her strength tempered by a tenderness that was purely for him, and they would dance in the high-pressure air, a performance of mutual respect and burning desire. You are the strongest thing I have ever known, she told him one night, her voice echoing in the dense atmosphere. Asher, sweating under the weight of the suit but grinning with the sheer rush of it, pulled her into a kiss that tasted of victory. We're humans, he reminded her, his voice amplified by the suit's external speakers. We don't just survive the pressure, we use it to make diamonds. Liara laughed, a sound that vibrated through the reinforced floorboards, a melody of pure, unadulterated joy. She knew he was right. They had taken the crushing weight of 2 different worlds and turned it into something beautiful, something that would shine long after the stars themselves had faded. The final treaty was ratified on the anniversary of their meeting, a grand event that saw the first-ever joint human inner rim colony established on a world that sat right on the edge of the habitable zone. It was a planet of extreme tides and heavy weather, a place that no other species wanted, but for humans and Liara's people, it was perfect. Asher and Liara stood on the balcony of their new home, watching the first transport ships descend through the thick, violet atmosphere. Look at them, Liara whispered, her hand resting on the swell of her stomach, where a new life, a miracle of genetic engineering and sheer willpower, was beginning to grow. Asher wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands joining hers. He felt the hum of the planet beneath his feet, a low-frequency vibration that he now understood perfectly. They're going to build something incredible here, he said, his voice full of a quiet, steady conviction. The galaxy was no longer a collection of silent, isolated species, but a conversation that was finally, truly, beginning to make sense. And as the sun set over the jagged, iron-rich mountains, casting long shadows across the plains, Asher and Liara stood together, a human and an alien who had found the only frequency that truly mattered, the one they shared. The legacy of their union stretched across the stars, a testament to the idea that the greatest strength of humanity wasn't its weapons or its wealth, but its heart. They had proven that no matter how different the language or how heavy the gravity, there was always a way to connect if you were brave enough to listen. Asher looked at Liara, her skin glowing with the soft, contented light of a woman who had finally found her home, and he knew that his life's work was complete. He had started as a technician fixing pipes, and he had ended up fixing the galaxy, one heartbeat at a time. "I love you," he whispered, the words simple and human, but echoing with the power of 1,000 worlds. Liara turned in his arms, her eyes a brilliant, swirling gold. "I know," she replied, her voice a perfect, resonant hum that he could feel in his very soul.